Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Chats. I'm Krista Harmon, a workforce development consultant with the Kent Intermediate School District, and I'm so happy to have Morgan Anderson with us today. She's a produce safety technician, and she has a real heart for conservation. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
So I love that you're a young professional, and we're going to hear about your path. Take us back, though, maybe when you were 15 or 16, did you think you'd grow up to be a produce safety technician? Tell us about your thoughts at that time.
Yeah, my first answer is no, because I didn't even know it existed. Honestly, a year ago, I didn't know it existed. But when I was 16, so I grew up on our family farm in the Kent City, Sparta area. I went to Sparta High School. And so I knew I wanted to do something with the environment because that's what was around me. And I always liked being outdoors. I saw my dad cultivating the fields. But then I also learned that maybe what we were doing wasn't the best thing for the environment. And when I looked out into the land in my backyard, it was beautiful, but maybe it wasn't the healthiest environment. And so I knew I wanted to do something with environmental quality, protection, stewardship, something like that. So I went to the University of Michigan for earth science and environmental studies with like a STEM focus. But then as I kept taking for that major, I had to take up to Calc 1. And so Michigan math is really atrocious to say the least. And so when I went through pre-calc, I realized math and the STEM path is not for me, but I'm still interested in the environment and not necessarily being that person in the water, taking the water test for water quality. Even though I thought that was important, it wasn't something that I was interested in as I kept taking more classes for this major. So then I pivoted to environmental studies with a social science focus. And that kind of led me to environmental law and policy as I kept taking more like intro to environment classes. And I was really interested in the policies supporting the farmers, boots on the ground, like my dad, and the way policies influence their decisions. And so I took that path. And then COVID hit halfway through my sophomore year at the university. And that was really rough because it isolated me from all my friends and the campus that I loved. And the way I learned was in person, writing down notes. I went to office hours every week, which was really helpful with content and just getting to know my teachers and my professors. And that all kind of changed with an online format. And that continued throughout my junior year. And so I'm grateful that I pivoted to the social science because I couldn't imagine not being passionate for the really STEM heavy environmental science route, and then also having to force myself to do that in an online environment. I would have been burnt out even sooner. But that being said, I also still got burnt out at the end of that virtual learning year. So when it came to my summer internship, my junior year, I got interested into agriculture once again as I kept taking these social science, environmental related courses and asking about how does this affect farmers? We're talking about how farmers influence the environment, but where is the farmer input? I only know one type of agriculture, which is the type that I grew up with, and that's livestock and cash crops, corn, soybeans, etc. So I wanted to expand on that knowledge. And so I worked at the campus farm that summer and also throughout the following year, my last year. And that made me learn that there's different ways to farm and different ways to set up food systems. So then I took like another pivot within that environmental studies realm. There's so many niches within environmental studies. It's so encompassing. The environment really touches on every aspect of our life. So there's a lot of routes people can take within that umbrella term. And so then I started focusing on food systems and specifically farming. And that led me to more agriculture related policy classes, but also just food system policy or food system classes in general. The way, insurance is set up to make farmers go big or, get out. That's a term that's thrown around a lot. So yeah, that's kind of my path of why I'm in food systems, which led me to produce safety tech, which I didn't even realize was a role when I graduated last year. I was looking for jobs back in the West Michigan area because I love the West Side. I love Lake Michigan, and the Southeast. It's great, but also the traffic is horrible. So I needed to leave the Southeast of Michigan, come back to the West Side, to Grand Rapids area, and I was looking for conservation, environmental related jobs, specifically food related ones, and I found produce safety. And I didn't know what produce safety was, even though I worked on a farm, which is a little interesting, but I was willing to learn.
I want to dig into all that about produce safety, but I have a couple questions for you because I want young people to understand when you went off to college, you're a strong student, you got admitted into U of M, and you hit that point with Calculus 1 that you're like, I'm not sure. I wanted to share how you felt about that, you know, and because that's something that a lot of young people will run into, and they need to know that maybe it's normal at some level. Kind of tell me what your thought process was.
My freshman year, I lived in a residence community for women in STEM. It was called Women in STEM and Engineering Residence Program, so WISE-RP. So it was all women in STEM living on one floor in this dorm. And it was a very supportive and welcoming environment, but also very competitive because they're all in STEM and they're in the engineering school. They're grinding, staying up till 2 a.m. every night. So I also thought I had to do that, even though my course load looked a little different. And I thought I wasn't working hard enough if I also wasn't living up to that. Like, I'm staying up till 2 every night. I'm getting this kind of grade on my paper, and I need to have this certain GPA. And so that factored into that calculus class of, this class is very hard and very demanding, and the time I'm expected to put in the class outside of the classroom was a lot. And I also, by taking the same environment classes that same time, that same semester, I realized that the STEM and being in the water and that route wasn't for me. But when I came to that realization, I felt like I was quitting because I didn't like the math and I didn't like this hardcore, like typical STEM classes. So I thought that was me quitting in a sense. And I didn't know who to ask because I'm a first gen student. So I didn't want to talk to my parents about it because I don't think they would understand in the sense of like how competitive it was and how the workload was. Because I'd always call my mom and be like, I'm staying up till 2, I'm working so hard. And she's like, go to bed. And I wish I probably could have, honestly, at the time. I was just in that environment, but I was like, no, Mom, you don't understand. So I went, luckily that WISE-RP program had a assistant director who, he's amazing. His name is Nick King. He was always like, please come to me if you have literally any concern, because I'm not just here for academic reasons, but also to make sure that you're adjusting to university life and that schedule. So I went to him and I was telling him how I was feeling about these classes and my interest, but also feels like I'm quitting the STEM by admitting that. And he was like, if that's not where your heart is, don't follow it. Don't follow that track. Like, you're free to switch majors. I never met someone who didn't switch their major. And so that made me feel a lot more comfortable in following my passion, honestly, and doing the social science route. So I would say that would also be a lesson learned, is just because I didn't like something that was hard or challenging didn't mean I was quitting it. It just mean I wasn't passionate about it. And if I didn't have that passion for it, I would have got burnt out. And also finding those people that you can look to, like a role model or like a mentor, I think are really important, because they also have led me through a lot of transition points in my university career, but also my beginning career life as well.
Yeah, I love that you were able to focus in on that, Morgan, because it's so important for young people to know to reach out, that they don't have to have that difficult time alone. You also mentioned that prior to COVID, you were very intentional about going to your professor's office hours and, connecting and building relationships with that. And I think that's also something I wanted to point out. That's such a good strategy, so that you're getting that support and help whatever you need. Sure.
I think something students hear a lot when they initially enter university or any type of higher ed environment people are like, use your resources, use your resources. And when I was a freshman, I was like, okay, I'll put that down the road when I feel comfortable. But really using my resources right away helped me, I guess, not waste time in the end of where I wanted to put my energy and who I would go to for a question versus trying to navigate all that later. Especially, thankfully, I did that in the front half because COVID hit and I would have been burnt out to do that in the second half. So I think doing that sooner rather than later is encouraged, even though it seems scary. And honestly, office hours, I was the only one a lot. So it was nice to have one-on-one with professors and talk about their cat and like find ways that they could vouch for me in a letter of rec or things like that too, because it was a very personal relationship. So
I love that. And I love that you were thinking at those early parts of your college career about what kind of questions you were having. When you go off to college, you have a limited amount of exposure. And then as you're being, given more opportunity to be educated, you start to ponder different things. And you mentioned about, how does this affect the farmers? Where's their voice? How are these policies impacting? And from your personal experience, I just love that you were growing and that you were able to pivot into some major that was a little more closely tied. Did that mentor help you even know about some of the other programs? Did you go back to career services office? And then also, how did you even find that first internship?
I would say career services I didn't utilize until my senior year when I was entering the job search, just because the internships I was looking for were more locally based. So I felt comfortable reaching out to them locally. If it was like a national, federal level, I probably would have utilized career services because it was a little more formal. But Nick King, the mentor I went to, he did help me route as far as like classes and some opportunities available, but also a lot of the professors and GSIs or grad students that helped lead the classes were honestly a big part of that opportunity finder as well. Because I would ask them, what has your path been? What organizations are you aware of? Or just talking in class and you find out who's doing what in the area or who's doing what in this state or in this region. It's really just having conversations with those kind of mentors, but also my peers as well, because students know a lot, even though we're all learning. And we also don't know what we don't know, but we learn from each other, I think, a lot too. And someone being from a different state who did an internship in high school, who had this role with native plants and rain gardens and things. So just learning about that was really helpful. As far as the career services, I don't think I utilized until my senior year when I was like, what's a cover letter? So they helped me with those like really formal aspects of job search versus connecting me with organizations. I guess it was more of like the technical skills of finding a job, like interviewing one-on-one, how to give a good interview, things like that. So, and also, the many opportunities I found were through multiple people. And as my network grew, because I took classes with the similar people who are all interested in food, would tell me about food things and food opportunities, or we would take a field trip to an organization who had partner orgs. So it kind of was just like a webbing of people and things that led me to realize what opportunities and jobs were available.
And I love that, because what you were doing is informational interviewing, which is what I'm trying to model with these career chats. And I love that you're able to give those very explicit examples of how that started to put some pieces in this puzzle together for you. So you realized that food systems was something. So what was your final degree in then? Was it?
It was called Program in the Environment, which is like environmental studies with a social science background. And then I had a minor through the Ford School of Public Policy. But as I took those public policy classes, I realized I liked policy, but not the environment of the policy school. It was very different than the environment realm that I was used to, where everyone is like collaborating on homework or like brainstorming together. And in the Ford School, it followed a very, I guess, more competitive environment, like similar to that environment I was talking about my freshman year, where people gatekeeped information or didn't want to help each other out because that means that you would bring up the score for the class, or like, because classes were curved sometimes for their grades. So I think that also made me also realize what I valued in a learning environment and a working environment. So when I was doing my job search, that was a question I asked. And actually my boss brought this up last month when she was hiring someone else, because she was like, they didn't ask me any questions. And I was like, what questions did I even ask? And she asked, you asked about the work environment, because that's something I really value, is having a cooperative and supportive work environment, and learning environment that I learned as well through taking different classes and different topics. And I realized,
I think that's a good red flag. Like
Mhm.
you have to know that you're with your people. So
Yeah,
if that's a good just self-assessment as you're out figuring out the world, that are these my people? Are these my people?
Mhm.
Because that sometimes can be a clue. Like I need to make an adjustment. So I love that you
Yeah.
asked that question in your interview, because that's how it works.
yeah,
So the food safety thing, again, we've had a couple career chats recently about the food
Mhm.
agribusiness, and I've loved learning everything about it. So tell us about your role and how did you get that first job, and then tell us what you're doing.
yeah. Getting the first job was difficult because there were many jobs that didn't pay well that I was offered, but I had to move like many states to. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm ready. I want to go back home to West Michigan for a second, and lean on that support system I have here and not go to a new state yet. And some people do go to new states, which is fine. But then, yeah, so sorry, can you repeat your question? Because I started off with that and then I forgot.
No, that's okay. Really, how did you get that first job?
Oh yeah,
You
the
know,
first
like
job.
that transition. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then there were other jobs that I didn't get the offer because I didn't have enough experience. So it was kind of like a balancing game of like, I need experience, but I also need to get paid and then have this experience to get a decent wage and a living wage for where I was moving to. So this first job I got because I think it was a local organization and it wasn't like me applying to USA Jobs, which is a wide pool of applicants. And also sometimes you just don't hear back from big platforms for that. You kind of just get ghosted, which is frustrating. Where on previous local orgs that I applied to, I feel like they give more effort in responding to people because they have that capacity sometimes, or it's a local based org. So they are more grassroots and things like that. So I was looking for local organizations, just also because I wanted to move back home. And so I interviewed and I wrote a cover letter. And luckily I got the job because I think I asked good questions and I did my research. Like when my boss was interviewing for a previous position this past couple months, she would ask like, have you heard about us before? And they were like, no. And she's like, you didn't even look us up on Facebook, like no research. So I also think doing your homework is a big part of that, especially for a first job. Like you want to make it look like you're giving effort to that interview, because you don't necessarily have the experience to back you up. So you want to have like that effort show. At least that's what I thought. So that's why I kind of did that. But I also realized in this first job, being able to say what I don't know is important. Especially when working with farmers, you don't want to say you know something when you don't, because they'll sense it that you're kind of BSing them a little bit. So yeah, I would say looking at the local orgs was helpful for this first job, because at first I started with the big national platforms of like Food Systems Network that has jobs nationwide, USA Jobs, just really national wide. And I got ghosted a lot, or had a phone call interview and then never heard back. And I don't know, but the local orgs I felt like were more responsive. So I just over time navigated more of my energy into finding those opportunities.
Well, what is your typical day like? And as a produce safety technician, like what do you do? I know you probably don't have a typical day, but help everyone understand what your role is.
Yeah, so produce safety, the term means basically ensuring that the food that we eat or the produce that we eat won't get us sick from whatever on-farm activities are being done, whether that's growing the produce, harvesting the produce, holding the produce, storing it, etc. All that's happening. For me, I only focus on the on-farm aspect, but there's the whole food chain that produce goes through. So I'm at like the root of where the produce is coming from. So my day-to-day honestly looks different. And I think that's something I also looked for when I was applying, was something that would be versatile and not monotonous. So sometimes I'm in the office looking at a food safety plan, or organizing an event, or going to a food summit. There was a food summit in East Lansing this Friday, and it was amazing. So I get to go to fun stuff like that, like conferences where I can learn from fellow professionals and network, which is especially important for me as a new first big girl job, is getting to know who's around and who's doing what is important. So sometimes I'm doing that, and then other times I'm on the farm with the grower, going around the operation, assessing any produce risk, if any, that they have going on. And then we kind of engineer a solution, which is fun because I get to read legislation like the produce safety rule. So that's kind of tying together like my policy with wanting to help farmers, like, and why I studied policy in school. So I get to read legislation, the produce safety rule, and translate that to boots on the ground farmers and tailor solutions that work for them and their operation. Because every operation is different. So like 3 apple farms can have the same issue, or whatever you want to term it, and each one can have a different solution that it fits within the regulatory requirement. So it's kind of fun to have something different, not only like on farm or in the office, but also each of those aspects of being in the office or being on farm is also different within itself. So I'm always learning. It's crazy. Every time I think I know something, I just realize I don't know anything about it, because there's more to learn within the produce safety realm, because we look at everything of when it's seeded to when it leaves the door on the farm. And there's a lot that happens to one single produce item in those steps between. So there's a lot of things to learn about that, but also just resources available to farmers, different places and outlets they can sell their produce. That's not something that I necessarily give technical assistance on, but it's a question that a lot of growers ask me. So I'm starting to realize that I'm a holistic resource, in the sense that I'm a beginning farmer and I want to set up my irrigation. What do I do? I may not know the answer, but we can find it together, or find the person that can help you. So just learning with and from the farmer has been wonderful. And that's what I wanted to do in this role and my first job. So I'm really grateful.
Well, it seems like a perfect fit from what you started.
Yeah.
I love it. You mentioned the food summit. I just wanted to plug that, because young people, that's how careers are built. You start to go to specialized events in your industry, and that's how you learn. You don't learn everything in college, right, Morgan?
Right. No, no, you do not. And even when I thought I knew like who did what, or like, oh, I know them because I went to an event with them before. No, they actually do like 500 other things that you don't know about until you talk about them or talk with them 10 other times. So it's a consistent relationship building too, which I love, because I love learning with and from people and chatting with them and building relationships. So it kind of is a nice synthesis of all the things I loved in food systems in my class, but in my lived experiences and with the policy realm. It's a nice meshing of them all.
Yeah, I think it's just absolutely wonderful to hear you in a job that fits you so well, because you didn't even know what you didn't know, and to have it come together for you, I'm so delighted for you.
Yeah, and I was deterred in the job search process because I started in March before I graduated, because that's when some people are like, oh, I'm getting this job, I'm moving here after graduation. So I felt pressure to start my job search, but then I realized I didn't know where I wanted to be after graduation. So I took a step back and I paused. I went on vacation and then I came back and moved back home. And I was like, okay, now I know what I want. I know what I'm looking for, so I can start there. Versus before, I was kind of grabbing at any straw, which was honestly a waste of time and effort on my end and the people that were interviewing me. So
I think that's like some serious gold career mentor wisdom right there. I mean, to take that time to step back and pause, to figure out what you want, and to do that inner work to start strong. I think that's so fantastic. And I loved how you were sharing about relationship building, because a lot of what's happening in high school, they're trying to work on soft skills, life skills with students, and talk about teamwork and communication. And I love that you were able to give examples of that in your daily work. I would like to know, a lot of young people love to know what your favorite part of your job is and what your least favorite.
I would say my favorite part is when I get to go on farm or to any cool food event, like the one this past Friday, the Good Food Summit, or I went to Portland, Oregon for a produce safety training. And then I got to meet people in Washington State and Oregon who were doing different things, but similar things in a different region. So I would say that's probably my favorite part, is once again, relationship building and learning from people in general. But the least favorite part, I would say my least favorite part is sometimes, because I'm funded by the state, the Michigan Department of Ag, naturally grants, and people who are probably familiar with this with grant work and stuff, they always have to show that they're using their grant dollars and being effective with the money that is granted to them. So sometimes there's grant reporting and grant metrics, which are important and I do keep track of, but sometimes it's not as fulfilling because it's very output and numbers based, and I'm a very like relational outcome based person. So sometimes it's difficult for me to switch to that numbers perspective. Not that it's horrible, it may just be less exciting than the relationship building aspect.
Oh, absolutely. I can understand that. We have about 3 minutes left, but I have one more question before I ask you about some mentor wisdom. You know, if a high school student's listening to you and thinking, man, this might be an industry that would be interesting to me, where would you recommend they get some, volunteer experience or classes they should take? Anything that maybe would have done differently or that you would encourage them to do at the high school level?
Yeah, I would say if you're interested in the environment in general, there are so many environmental organizations in Grand Rapids. There's ALGRO, the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds, there's Trout Unlimited, and those are people that I did stuff with in high school that introduced me to conservation districts. And what are those? So once again, like opening up those pathways to other things once you enter one. So I would say look around your area of what's around you and ways to get involved, specifically environmentally, but also if you're looking in ag and food systems, there's always volunteer days on farms in the Kent County area, and there's so many farms in Kent County and Ottawa County, and a lot of produce farms, which are more fun in my opinion than the corn and soybeans I come from, because you can just eat it right off the plant. It's really satisfying. So volunteer opportunities that way. If there's also people you can job shadow, someone job shadowed the Michigan Assurance Environmental Program technician, then they focus on environmental risk on farms, so like me, but environmental focus. Job shadow people like that. I job shadow an engineer in high school, environmental engineer, because that's what I thought sounded interesting. And then they told me that they basically get land ready for development, and I was like, nope, I don't want to do that. So I'm glad I shadowed you before I spent time in engineering classes at school. So yeah, just asking people questions, because people are always willing to give you that knowledge and information. And then yeah, also just following your passion, I think, is a word of wisdom. I think I'm jumping the gun on your question.
No,
but
you're good. No, you're perfect. We have about a minute left. So you're right on time, Morgan.
Yeah, I would say have my grandpa's last words to me were have a good time. And honestly, I live by them, because if there's something that I'm doing, of course there's like bad days, or days that aren't as fun as other days, but overall, if you're having a good time and enjoying what you're learning and what you're doing, I think you're gonna have more put into it and come out of it. So I live by that. If I'm not having a good time, it's not for me.
So I think that's a beautiful piece of wisdom from your grandpa, that have a good time. Let's put that on a bumper sticker and live with all of us.
Yep.
Morgan, you've been a delight as a mentor today, and I just really, really appreciate you sharing your passion and giving us some insights into your world of food safety, and hopefully we'll pique a few young people's interest and keep your talent pipeline going your way. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for having me.